Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Danette and I have gotten some great questions, so we're going to have a wonderful dialogue. Please feel free to submit further questions. I'll be monitoring the chat box with some help behind the scenes, so if you have something that you'd like to ask us in the course of the dialogue, please let us know. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Gemma Dreher, and I am the president of ACC-Northeast Chapter at the moment, the president of the board of directors. I'm very lucky to serve with Danette on that board of directors. I'm also an attorney at TD Bank in Portland, Maine. So, and I'd like to introduce you to Danette Wineberg. Danette is currently an adjunct professor, an interim director of academic success at the University of New Hampshire Law School. Prior to that, Danette was the vice president and general counsel and secretary of the Timberland Company. And I have to tell you, Danette, when I told my kids that I was going to be chatting with you today, they were very excited because they really do love Timberland. It's a well-known and popular brand in New Hampshire. So prior to that, though, Danette, you had a very distinguished career serving for 3 different companies over a course of 25 years as a chief legal officer. So you were at Little Caesars, which is headquartered in Michigan, and at Highland Superstores. And you started with Timberland in 1997, so she was with the company for quite some time until the company's sale in 2011. And since then, as I mentioned, you've been teaching at the University of New Hampshire Law School, teaching a course on in-house law practice. And I've had the privilege of coming in and meeting with your class at a couple of different times with other in-house attorneys. And it's always a dynamic group and a dynamic discussion. And I love the idea that we're introducing law students now to the career of in-house practice. So Danette's been doing that at the law school for some time, and very recently she started counseling students as part of an academic success program, which also seems very humane to me, having gone to law school in the 80s. I really like the idea and the sound of that type of program. And then prior to Danette's first in-house role, she practiced law at a Detroit law firm. Danette is a graduate of the University of Michigan Law School. She graduated with honors, and she has a BA with honors from Oberlin College. So that's a bit about Danette. We're going to jump in now and ask you some questions. And again, I really want to encourage all of the listeners, if you have a question that you'd like us to address during the webinar, just let me know. Okay. So the first question I have, Danette, which we got some questions from members who signed up early, is I want to talk about how the practice of law in-house has changed over the last 20 plus years. Can you give me some highlights from your perspective on what has changed?
A lot has changed. Particularly if you go back even more than 20 years, when in-house wasn't really a sought after practice. And now it's grown so much. When I first joined the ACC, there were just a few thousand members in the US. And now it's grown so dramatically. So that's one thing. In-house departments have grown in size and influence. And then the type of practice has grown. Lawyers have gotten involved, general counsel in particular, in other areas, other business areas in the company as well. So there have been pretty dramatic growths. What have you seen?
I agree with you. I mean, I have talked about how when we first started navigating the use of email in our practices, I'm sure you recall those days, and the fast escalation of technology in our practices. And also the different roles that we play, right? I mean, if you were to name hats that you wore as general counsel in your various companies, how many would you suggest you wore at any given time?
A few. When the first company that I was General Counsel at was going into having financial difficulties, I started getting a variety of hats, from human resources, corporate communications, investor relations, and quite a few. So yeah, that happens, and you kind of get involved in those areas in any case. When you were mentioning technology, I remember when we got Blackberries at Timberland. That was a very big deal.
Yes. So I'm curious, when you mentioned that your first company in financial trouble, have you had other functions, cost centers, or other parts of the company reporting into the General Counsel's office, or has always been just strictly legal?
Except for that first company, no, the other two, it was strictly legal.
Mm-hmm. I've learned recently that there are General Counsel's offices now where they're lumping in some other corporate functions, legislation, communications, and those kinds of things. I think that's another change I've seen in the role and in in-house practice.
There are some things that were not strictly legal, but like government relations, that was sort of in our wheelhouse at Timberland in particular over the years. But I think a lot of it depends on the size of the legal department, the size of the company, and the company's needs in those areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next question that we have is talking about the most important skills to being a successful GC. And I want to comment on that a little further. I was reading something this morning in the context of where we are as a nation, an emphasis once again on emotional intelligence. And so I'm particularly curious about that. So generally, skills to be successful in the role of General Counsel, and then your role in this idea of emotional intelligence and how that plays in.
So students in the in-house counsel class over the years are always surprised that people don't have to come to you for advice in corporations. You know, there may be guidelines, there may be rules, but they don't have to. So you kind of have to make them want to come to you for advice. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the most successful in-house counsel that I had on my team were ones who developed very strong relationships with the business people in the units they served. And that came from being collaborative, and critical is knowing, understanding, and caring about the business, whatever the business is and whatever those issues are that particular department may have. So being integrated into the business is really important.
I agree with that. I think about sometimes the way we manage our external counsel and wanting them to be a true strategic partner with us as we solve legal issues. And I like to port that over into the way I interact with my business clients as well, to be a strategic partner for them, mm-hmm. as opposed to just someone who's dispensing sort of theoretical legal advice.
Yes, collaboration and partnership are really important, and you point out correctly with outside counsel as well. The most successful outside counsel with us, the ones we were closest to, were the ones who had that same approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we had talked last week about the program, and we had some questions about the positive and negative aspects of being a GC, and I think both of us were scratching our heads a little bit around what we would consider negative. But what do you think? What are some of the positive parts? And if there were struggles, what were some of the struggles, or what would you do differently or change if you could?
Well, I think some of the I think being a GC, being an in-house counsel is just an awesome position. It's interesting, endlessly challenging, intellectually. You get to work with a lot of different people from a lot of different places in the organization. It's just, that's great. Some people might say that as a GC, when you're on call 24/7, that can be a negative. It didn't feel that awful to me. It was okay. I didn't want my team to always feel like they were 24/7, but I think that was part of the role, especially with a global company, international business. For me, I think the challenges were all around the people stuff, you know, struggling to be the right kind of leader, manager, and when things go bump in the night, how to handle that. I think those were the personnel stuff was the challenging stuff.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I used to say for the law function when I was the GC at Velcro Industries is that we never closed. When you're global, there's some part of the world where an office is open. So it was important for, again, in leadership to protect the team a bit, but also have everyone understand that we're on call, right? So if something does go bump in the night, it's pretty important for us to be available. And for our clients, our internal business folks, to trust us enough to call us.
Yes.
And that can be challenging, but also one of the most rewarding aspects of the job. You know, when you know that you're helping the enterprise move in the right direction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you want
now,
to
when
be
you talk, yes, when you talk to your students about that aspect of the job, I'm going to show a little bit of bias here against younger folks. How do they react? Are they like, "Ooh, that's too much"? You know, or what is the response you get from the students you're interfacing with now?
Well, a lot of things about in-house end up being surprises for them, but because they have impressions that it's 9 to 5, or you know, that there's opportunity for balance, whatever the heck that means. And there are those. I mean, there's definitely that you have a little different control than you do in a law firm, and your work is different from in a law firm. The students who I work with and talk to are very interested in the substantive work. That is, what is the work? What is challenging? What is interesting? Where can I grow? What can I do differently? And so that's they have been more interested in that at the end of the day. They're just so nervous right now about are they ever going to get a job, you know? So
right. When you think about your last role as GC at Timberland, how much of the time was doing substantive work, and how much of it was management, either, you know, up laterally or down through your team?
It varied dramatically. I happen to like doing legal work, and so there was a certain amount of that, and the other folks at Timberland expected it too. So maybe half and half. It was a while ago, so it's hard for me to remember exactly how much time. It all mushed together because we worked on teams, informal and formal teams, running things by each other and talking about legal issues, and and being on projects, negotiating a license agreement. It took place over a period of months.
And that sounds like a fun environment to work in. I've talked with some GCs who spend a lot of time on management, budget, dealing with the board of directors, in a positive way, not saying that that's negative, but really not having very much time to practice law. And I would suspect, I guess, I'd like you to correct me if I'm wrong, that when you are in a more team environment, more collaborative, you're bringing greater value to the business. Is that fair?
Yeah, perhaps, but I think that a lot of that depends on the size of the company, the size of the department, and the culture of the company as well, and what they expect, what the company expects. So I've always been in relatively small legal departments in relatively large companies. So there's been a great variety of legal work, and yes, there was a certain amount that was budget and all of that, but there was also legal work that had to be done.
So as a small function within a larger corporation, you mentioned balance a few minutes ago. How did that work?
Yeah, well, I like to think about balance as something you're always out of balance. That, sometimes there's a big work project, some big negotiation, something going on where you have to kind of pull away from personal life. Other times there's things going on in your personal life where you need to spend more time there. And so it's a back and forth. It's not scales that are the same all the time. One of the wonderful things about being at a company, an organization where you believe in and care about the mission, and you're able to do a lot there that's personally fulfilling, is that there's more blurring of the personal professional. It's not, I walk out the door and I become a different person. I'm the same person wherever I am. And Timberland has on-site daycare and a lot of family-friendly policies. So that helps as well.
It sounds like it was a fun place to work, and knowing you from the board of directors and how we interact there, I know that you would be, I want to say, fun to work with as well. So
I don't know if my team would agree with that part, but I did have fabulous people working on my team, no question.
So another question that we have is, what do you see as the most significant future challenge for in-house attorneys or in-house departments?
So I think there's more of the same, which is in-house departments are constantly called on to do more with less. How you can leverage your resources, which are time and people and money, outside counsel, inside counsel, in a way that serves the organization best. Those have been always the challenges, and I think they just get more pressured as there are changes in a business, in the economy, etc. So I think that is. Another is is more technology. I think that technology, there is a lot more available in technology now for in-house departments. Some of it is expensive, so that's an issue, and figuring out what works for your company and your department. Lots of issues there. And then another is delivery of legal services, legal support. So it was typical back when I first got into this, when dinosaurs roamed the earth. You had one choice. You had outside counsel that you went to for resources. Well, there are tons of, they were called alternative legal services providers, seen as alternative to law firms, but they aren't all alternative. It's just more of a choice now of where you get legal services. And so it's more complicated. You don't just call up a law firm for additional resources. You can call up a whole variety of places for additional resources. So I think those are some of the future challenges, current and future.
Yes. This concept of doing more with less, I find very interesting when you overlay the technology. So when we think about automating certain aspects of our practice, or outsourcing some of the low-level repetitive work so that, I always wanted my teams to do strategic, intellectually challenging work. It can get a little tricky, I think, and as you said, deciding where resources are going to be utilized, how they're going to land, where you're going to land in the deployment of your own time and the time of your team is maybe going to get trickier as we go forward.
It has been tricky, and it will get trickier, yes. But I mean, our choices are great, but they create more complexity too in the decision making.
I was very recently working on a project, multitasking, which I think we all do more and more. And now that we're home, I have, as you know, I had to make sure that the office door was closed and locked before we started because the family is downstairs. In any event, I was multitasking and I got an isolated question that I answered in a vacuum because it needed to be done quickly. I fortunately had the time to circle back and look at it really in context and correct myself before things went really south. But I talked to young attorneys about that as well. I mean, this idea of, getting more done more rapidly and being more distracted. We've got our phones and, I've got my iPad here that I've got the questions on, but things keep popping up on that. I also wonder about developing talent, how that's going to impact us. I'm a very seasoned attorney, and I almost made a very stupid mistake last week because I was doing too much too fast. What do you? I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this.
Yeah. We all do that. Yes. No matter how much.
How do your students work with all of the distractions and the seem shorter and shorter attention span? Are you observing that in a younger generation of soon-to-be attorneys, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. I've not seen anything that I didn't expect, I guess, with the distractions and multitasking. I think that being remote, working remote, the whole pandemic from school and work has resulted maybe in people having to focus more when I see that with the students, having to focus more in class if they're remote, even though you could get distracted very easily by 37 devices that they have up in their offices or workspace.
Right.
Yeah.
So we actually received a question on that about how to manage and advise folks virtually, what we're doing during the pandemic and sheltering in place, if you will. And it's interesting because for my part, really having that connection with my business clients has required me, as you just said, to be much more focused and attentive. And, I'm not just on the phone anymore. I'm on a video most of the time and needing to really ensure that I've got their attention and assuring them that they've got mine. Is there anything that you've observed during the last several months as we've gone through this extraordinary time that's impacted your work?
Interesting. I think the informal communication is, since that's gone, running into colleagues in the hallway, having conversations when you're getting a cup of coffee, that trying to find those kinds of connections is, I think, is more challenging. And when I think about a work environment like a company, that a lot goes on in those informal conversations. And the students miss that too, those who aren't going to the school all the time. I found an interesting, I guess, dichotomy because I work with several students who are self-described introverts, and they kind of like this distant stuff, and they're not struggling with it as much as they said it's kind of reversed. Their friends who are extroverts are having a lot more trouble than adjusting than they are. It was just an interesting observation a couple of them had. So I think finding, to me, as I think about both work in, GC type role and also just what we're all doing today in school, finding improved communication. I think communication is still the issue. Making sure people are included, figuring out how to get information out to people in the right way. Students are inundated with emails, but it's pretty much the only way to communicate right now. So, and I'm sure that's true of employees, too. So finding those ways is challenging.
Yes, I have, and I'm sure with a lot of companies, we have the ability to instant message. And of course, people text now all the time. So I have found myself needing to sign out of my Skype account and at least turn my phone upside down when I'm in a meeting so that I really can stay focused on the subject at hand. And I have the opportunity from time to time to talk with students, and they're finding that as well, that it's because they can't pop in to see the professor, or younger attorneys can't pop in to see the GC or their manager. They really need to stay tuned in to when they do have that contact. So
yeah, we had a discussion at a faculty meeting about rules about having people, and I'm sure this happens in companies too, where you're on a Zoom call. Should you be on video, or should you require people to be on video? What are the rules?
Yeah.
New world.
And that's an interesting thing too. So when we think about diversity, and you mentioned introversion versus extroversion, I imagine that there are some people that are uncomfortable on video, that might not really, or are just, they've just fed the kids, or they've just done some homeschooling, so they're still in their pajamas. So to me, there's a couple of elements there that we're seeing inside people's homes for the first time. So I'm talking with senior executives that are sitting in their living room, and the children noises or the dogs are now just kind of white noise. I mean, we've grown accustomed to that. But I'm not sure how we can mandate how you show up. I don't know.
It's interesting. People, I've been involved in situations where hiring is happening, during this shutdown. Hiring has to happen, during the pandemic. So people have said you actually can get to know people in a different way, because you're interviewing people in their home setting. So similar to your comment about the CEO in their living room. So you learn more about people. It sometimes humanizes it a little bit more. It's interesting.
Yes. I was on a call with an external party, and the whole back wall of their room was filled with books, just wall-to-wall books. And I would have never expected that of that person. So it really shined an interesting new light on my perception of them. So we have another question here. The difference between, so the question is, what is the difference between an in-house position that's not GC and the GC position as far as like politics are concerned and board involvement and the type of work performed? I know you spent most of your career in a leadership role, whereas I've bounced up and down. And we talked a little bit about that. I mean, so for me, right now, I am deep in legal work for the bank, for TD, and I'm really having a lot of fun. I mentioned to you when we were talking last week, not having to worry too much about budget. I mean, I think we all, as in-house attorneys, we all have to be conscientious about how we spend external dollars and what work we decide to do, but, not having the pressure of overall budget and not having sort of the pressure of, annual reviews and all that is nice for me right now at this juncture in my career. In your observations managing teams, are there aspects of being a leader, and you've been a leader in a couple different companies, that you've noted as opposed to the folks that you were leading?
Well,
that were big differences.
So folks who are on the team, on the legal team, not the general counsel, might be more specialized in their legal work, and that percentage of the legal work that they do versus other things like helping out with budgeting or managing paralegals or project might be different than the general counsel role. So those are there's might be more specialty. But again, I keep saying it depends. It depends on the size of the department and the culture of the company and the company's business.
Okay. So we have a question that just came in from the audience, and the question is, what are some traps for the unwary in the way we're managing data and data security, since most people are working from home and connecting from home to the company server or cloud? So I imagine that for you now at the law school, are there any unique aspects of data sharing, data security that you've had to adjust to in your role?
No, because my role doesn't really touch on those areas, so I haven't had that much. The university is a sort of a closed system, and so I've always been able to sign on from remotely. I've always worked from home as well as going into an office, so at the law school. So it's no different in that regard. I suspect it's different for the big support functions at the university, and just having to deal with security of those systems. I was just thinking we all worked remotely to a large degree at Timberland, and again, because it is a global company, people were traveling and always had connections. I do think data privacy and data security are one of the big issues, obviously, going forward in general, that GCs have to be concerned about.
And I agree with you there. I don't think it's an area where you can, not have at least some foundational awareness of what's happening within your organization. Yeah, it's so in my role as president, I have the opportunity to speak with members from time to time, and there are a lot of questions around enhanced encryption. So if at one time, if you think about a centralized management of data and data security, and now it's completely dispersed, I've had lots of discussions around privacy and the privacy of employee data and the privacy of customer data. So enhanced encryption and really some very simple things around ensuring that either your employees or your vendors are working in a private area, and not sitting on their living room couch with either visitors or kids coming in and out, that sort of thing. So I think there's some basic common sense things that we can think about as in-house attorneys, but also there are going to be more sophisticated programs and ways that we're either encrypting or destroying or just managing data as we continue in this more dispersed type of model that we're in right now.
So I'll put in a plug for an organization that is headquartered here in New Hampshire, the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And I think there probably should be membership in most of, from any company that's involved in this, because it's a great resource, and they're on the cutting edge of all of these privacy issues. And I also think COVID has brought up some tensions with all of our privacy regulations and rules. What people should know, what they can say, what they can't say. And I know the university has been dealing with that, so I'm guessing organizations have as well.
Mm-hmm. So we have another question from the audience, and the question is, how do you create value for the businesses you worked for? And then how do you measure that value? That's a good one.
Those are really hard. There are books written on this. Well, creating value is first understanding where your company makes money and where the pressure points are, and where the pressure points in terms of the business operations and the legal issues, and sort of working with that tension and creating the value. How you measure it and how you communicate that value of measurement is, if someone figures that out, that'd be great. I see questions about that pretty much every day on the ACC listservs that, that I'm a member of, because it's very hard. And fundamentally, lawsuits avoided is, you know, if you're doing your job, you probably can avoid lawsuits. When you have an in-house counsel, you're doing things in advance to make sure. How do you measure lawsuits avoided? It's very hard to do that. So it's a little easier when you're measuring, okay, so we did this inside. When we do work inside the company in our legal department, it saves money because we're not spending it outside, or work that we're doing more efficiently. Those are a little easier to deal with, but I don't mean easy.
Right. So it's interesting because again, depending on the space, I mean, I find it tricky in the litigation space as well. You know, certainly budget is always a good metric. We're going to do this within this budget, and we're going to try to accomplish these various milestones. You know, if you have a litigation plan and performing against that plan. In the contract world, you know, the drafting and execution of contracts, I agree that in-house, you know, saying, well, we're going to do this in-house and save X number of dollars, or developing templates to suggest that there's a baseline that you can start from. So there are mechanisms to use. For me, the limiting factor in a lot of that when I'm communicating out to my non-legal executives is making sure they need to have a deep enough understanding of what goes into the various phases of litigation, including now, of course, discovery and e-discovery, or the phases of contract draft and then proposal and negotiation and closure. Like there's a lot of intense legal work that goes into that, you know, so you might say to an executive, I'm going to do a 100-page agreement, a master services agreement. It's going to be lengthy and it's going to take 6 months. And they're like, what? Like, you know, really? You need, so that's the tricky part to me, is really creating a metric that resonates with the people who want to measure you. That's my 2 cents on that. So another question here from the audience, the trend to have GCs report to the CFO versus the CEO in the last few years, and departments really focusing on cost control, you know, so legal being viewed as overhead as opposed to a real strategic partner. What are your thoughts on that, Danette?
Well, the latter one is the one I talked to law students about in the class, because I analogize it to, in a law firm, the lawyers are the boots. If you're using Timberland analogies, at Timberland, we're not the boots. We're not what makes money. We're considered overhead. But so we always want to be talking about adding value, and not, we are a cost center. That's just the way it is. In law firms, you are not the same kind of cost center. You're what drives the business. That's what makes money for the law firm. Now that means the work is a little different, and you know, lots of things are different because of that. So I think that is just a fact of life for in-house. So that's why that value piece is important. So how you become a strategic partner, and I like those words that you used. You're a strategic partner with the business, getting to know the business, getting to know the people so they trust you. So they understand when you're creating problems for them in what they want to do, that you have their best interests at heart, that we're all on the same team and we care about this company and we care about this company making money. So I think that's some of the way that you help with that issue.
Have you reported to the CEO in each of your roles, or has there been a different reporting structure?
There's been a different reporting structure everywhere. And to me, again, being in, first of all, the 3 companies that I was essentially the GC in were all family founded or family run companies. So 2 of them were the same structure, that is public companies, but the founding family still owned the controlling stock. And Little Caesars was and is a private company run by the founding family. So that has a different, those have different cultures because of that. I happen to like that, those cultures. Obviously, I worked a long time in those kinds of companies. So in all of those companies, the reporting structure only sort of matters. I understand in bigger companies and issues of reporting to the CFO or the chief administrative officer versus the CEO really makes a difference with what you know, seat at the table, influence. But I think you can still, to me, it was, can I get my job done? And is the person that I'm reporting to a mentor, a partner, a helpful person I can go to? And fortunately, I had that experience.
So, and it's interesting that you say so when you talked about culture and company size, I think that's really significant here. So I have been a vocal opponent to reporting to another executive as opposed to the CEO. And in fact, I had an opportunity for a GC role that I declined for that very reason. So in the organizations that I've been in one small family-owned company, but then in large organizations after that. And from talking with other folks, I have formed the view that to really have a voice at the table and to be a strategic player, you need to be on par with your other C-suite executives. So as GC or Chief Legal Officer, if the CFO or the CIO is reporting into the CEO, then you should be as well. I have wondered recently if that has something to do with the fact that I have oftentimes been the only woman on the team. So I have felt the need to maybe be a little louder or a little bit more forceful than if I was sitting on a more diverse team. But I happen to have strong feelings about that. And you're right. I think it goes right to the size of the organization and the culture, and perhaps even the diversity of the organization that you're representing.
And there's another factor, because I said, can I get my job done? Is this going to be helpful, this person helpful, et cetera? But I think the other thing that's really important is the independence of the in-house function, which if we forget as in-house attorneys can get us into trouble because we have different ethical rules. But I think, can you be independent? And I think part of the reporting to the CEO versus the CFO is that CFO may have is only looking at the budget, and the role is much bigger. So it really does depend on the people in those positions, the culture of the organization, and the size of it and how things get done.
Okay, we have a few more questions. I want to make sure we get to everything if we can. So the next one is, how much influence does a GC have over the strategy and direction of a company? And what can a GC do more of to be key in influencing same?
Influencing the strategy of the company?
Yes.
So I think that, keep answering things with it depends, but it does. If it's growth into, if the strategy involves growth in international areas where you haven't been in international areas before, then the GC has quite a role in that, in the team, the legal team. And what does that mean? Opening up an office in China if you've never been in China before. Well, there's lots of implementation things, and bringing those up in advance as part of the strategic discussion. These are issues before the company gets too far down that road with wanting to expand in a different way. I think there are a number of GCs who are very involved in the strategy. These are GCs who have MBAs, who maybe have broader span of control than the legal department. And again, I think it depends on the culture of the company, because strategy can be discussed very formally or informally. And those informal discussions are a chance to influence more as the general counsel. And being in a place where people don't say, oh, you're the attorney, what do you have to say about, a new product or something like that. Actually, I didn't have a lot to say about new products. And the marketing people used to comment that there was a reason I was a lawyer and not a marketing person.
So, it's interesting. I'm fascinated by your response, and I do agree with you that a lot of it depends on the company and the culture. In my experience, it also depends a little bit on the people. So, people that know me know that I'm an extrovert. I really thrive on being around a lot of people, and I'm also a bit entrepreneurial. So I've tried wherever I could to really insert myself in the business. And so the second part of the question is the key to having more role in influencing same. And in my various in-house roles, I've learned deeply about the business. In fact, when I was at BAE Systems, I was there for 10 years. I was supporting a lot of technical folks, and I took coding classes. I learned how to code and program. I learned deeply about open source software and was able to really then use that knowledge combined with my legal skills to start to talk about strategy. So to me, getting deep in, if you have that drive and that's something that interests you, getting really deep in the business, letting the business know that you're there, that it's not, that it's just not, you had started at the beginning of the program, you mentioned that students are surprised that people don't have to ask for advice. So I think also becoming more valuable to the overall business by inserting yourself, delicately when you can, and asking if you can be included in meetings, digging into some of what's going on with the product, what the issues are, a little bit outside of what your legal responsibilities might be, but just immersing yourself as deeply in the business as you're interested in doing, I think really helps with that.
I think that's critical. And I worked for companies who, wanted everybody to understand and care about the business. At Little Caesars, when you joined Little Caesars, no matter what role you were joining in, your first 2 weeks on the job was making pizza and working in a store, making pizza. That's what everybody had to learn to do, that because that was fundamental to the business, to learn about that. So I think that the most successful in-house lawyers do that, totally integrate in the business that they're serving, and that they invite themselves to department meetings, and they learn from that about the strategy going forward and the work that that department is doing. And I'm fortunate that I have a lot of guest speakers at my class, and many of them talk about how they integrate in the business. Someone who worked at one point for a mining company took a tour of mines, went how we do this, how do we extract this mineral from the ground, how do we do, so learning all those details, going to factories, visiting factories, is really important to be a successful in-house lawyer in general.
Mm-hmm. So there's another question here, Danette, which I know we could spend a lot of time on. Would you be able to share your experiences as a female GC and whether there were any challenges throughout your career in your various roles? Did this change over time in different companies? Appreciate any insight. So that was for both of us, but I'd like you to go first.
I just visited a class at my alma mater, Michigan Law, and the course is a seminar called Lawyering While Female. And those were some of the questions that students asked. And I guess I didn't have a lot of overt being treated differently, but it changes over the years. Definitely, it changed over the years. In-house and in the law firm, I was the only female in my law firm, and the mentors I had, the partners who I worked for, and learned from, were fabulous mentors, and didn't expect me to behave differently. And those were days when there weren't that many women in practice. So there were always women. Little Caesars was founded by a couple, and Mike and Marion Illich, and she was as involved in the business as he was. So every company I was with, there were women in executive positions, and again, family businesses. So it was a different feel. And at Timberland, our CEO went out of his way to make sure we had women on our board. So we had women and other diversity folks on our board. Over the years, we had 3 or 4 women, with 3 at one time, so that was good visibility for folks for the employees in the company as well. And then they served as mentors to all of us too. So
wow, it sounds like you had I was going to say unique, and I don't mean that, but just experience that was inclusive, and how wonderful to hear that.
It doesn't mean it was perfect, though. There were stuff happens, and we worked globally, and the way professional women are treated around the world is different. So
right.
there have been those experiences as well. So
yeah, it just reminded me when I first went in-house, I was also with a family business, a husband and wife team, and the wife was the chief technology officer, but I was traveling over in Asia, and this was back in the early, actually like the mid-90s, and I was not at the table. I mean, think about Japan back then, right? I wasn't even really allowed to be in the room, but for my CEO insisting that his attorney stay with him, I probably would have not been in the room. So I've also been in cultures where for me as a woman, one of the trickiest parts, because I've traveled quite a bit globally in my leadership roles, is keeping up with the culture, and in particular, consuming alcohol or some of these really late, long dinners. That was hard for me, and I struggled with wanting to keep pace and be part of the team, but honoring who I am as a woman, and not really wanting to do anything that was foolish. So that it's odd. It's not really, I don't think it has anything to do with me being a lawyer, but that came up, in Korea, where there's some crazy drinking customs, and some other places where that was a struggle, you know, for me. So I think too, I feel fortunate in that I started my career with a family-run business, and then when I went to BAE Systems, although it is perceived as, you know, it's government contracting and a lot of former military personnel, I worked with really amazing people who pushed me and really saw me for my skills and did not read into my gender in any way. So I felt really emboldened there as well. So I now say that I'm able to show up and be who I am, like be my whole self in my role. And I also feel sometimes that was a unique or a special experience, right, that not necessarily all women have. And so I feel it's incumbent upon me to support women coming up and help and mentor whenever I can. And I do try to do that. And I know you do as well, Danette.
Well, yeah,
so
about that.
So we have some other questions that we're not going to get to. I will ask the administrators to capture those, and maybe we can figure out some way to answer some of the questions. There were some that were submitted ahead of time that we did not get to as well. Danette, I want to thank you so much. This went by really quickly, and I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So,
thank you.
And thanks to all the members who signed on and listened to Danette and I chatting. For my part, feel free to reach out if there's something further you'd like to chat about. I'm certainly here, and as you heard, as an extreme extrovert, love to talk. So I have no reservations about anyone wanting to reach out. We do have some programs coming up this month and next, so please check out the website for any programs that are scheduled over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And once again, thank you very much for signing on. And Danette, thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Take care.